Let's face it, you are more than a resume. You have a personality and things about you which just cannot be captured on paper. On this podcast, we are working to humanize the hiring experience by giving you a voice. So let's talk, learn from one another, and find that next great opportunity. I'm your host, Eric Ryan Jones, and this is Fired Before Christmas. Hey everybody, welcome to another episode of the Fired Before Christmas podcast. Today I am meeting with Brian Oblinger, and he is recently unemployed, past 2 months, and he is here, found through LinkedIn through a buddy of ours, I believe. Correct?
That's right. Yeah. Always good to, have the second degree connections, right?
It is. And I'm learning more, and I already knew this. I'm learning more and more that, connections are everything. And especially when you're job searching, it definitely helps. So really appreciate you coming on the show with me today and taking this time to talk to us. So why don't you do me a favor and introduce yourself to the audience?
Well, thanks for having me, Eric, and for the listeners out there. So, I'm Brian Oblinger. I'll start by saying that one of the cool things I think is I was fortunate to make my passion my career. Now, I think, you always want to, there's some degrees of caution around that. But in my particular case, I've always worked in and around communities and, customer experience and those types of things. And I really got started doing that at a fairly young age, believe it or not, and just kind of worked my way up through this. And a lot of it was timing. I kind of got into it when, there was the social media boom of '08 and '09 and all of that. So that's what I've been doing for the last 20 years is building communities, thinking about CX, advocacy, learning, enablement, all these kinds of topics of, how do we talk to our customers and how do we treat them really well? And how do we build something that's going to be a competitive advantage, a differentiator for us. And so that's what I was doing up until a couple months ago, got caught up in a COVID layoff. And here we are now talking to Eric.
And you actually spurred that experience of creating communities and getting laid off and being stuck into COVID into a really cool podcast. Can you talk a little bit about your podcast?
Yeah, well, so it's called In Before the Lock, and you can find it at ib4tl.fm, or you can just Google In Before the Lock. And so In Before the Lock, by the way, is, if you're, for everybody out there listening, if you're not familiar, so in forum culture back in like the 90s, the late 90s, early 2000s, it's a common phrase you'll find there. You probably see it on Reddit at times when there's like a controversial topic or something that's just completely gone off the rails. You'll see someone pop in there and say In Before the Lock, and it's sort of just a recognition of like, yeah, the moderators are going to come shut this thing down and I'm getting in here, getting my free post, right? So that's the meaning. But I have a good friend. I'm here in Denver currently, and I have a good friend. She lives in Boulder named Erica Cool, and she's also a very, very tenured, seasoned community vet. And prior to COVID, we were meeting for lunch all the time, and we would have these really fascinating conversations about our industry and, all of our opinionated opinions on things. And at some point I was just like, we should just record this. Like, this is it. This is the show, right? It's like Jerry and George at the coffee shop talking about nothing, saying this is the show. So, that's really how it got started. And we produce a show. It's about, every 2 weeks, and we talk about community and customer experience. And we also have a bunch of free resources there. So we're really just trying to help people out and help them understand, what the opportunity is and why they should be investing in this, and then helping them get started with resources. So it's been really fun so far.
Yeah, community is something I've gotten really big into recently. I'm going through a cohort, as it would be, that's all about building communities around business ideas. And then I've always had a heart for community. I've always had a heart for relationships and people. Back in the day, I actually ran a web development community in one of those old BB edit type web forums that you're talking about. So I locked many posts in my day that got out of hand, especially when you've got the whole Mac versus PC conversation that would happen back in the
it's Mac, by the
late
way,
90s.
Just for the record.
I'm right there with you, man. It is 100% Mac. This podcast is being recorded on a MacBook Pro, so all my editing is in GarageBand at the time, so definitely there. But yeah, community is a fun thing, and I think COVID-19 has really made people recognize how important community is, both from a business standpoint and from a personal standpoint. Are you more focused on the business side for your podcast, or are you a little bit on both sides of
it? Pretty much all over the place. I mean, I think Eric and I both come from a background of doing this, at large enterprise B2B, type companies. So we definitely have that lens on it. With that said, I've worked on probably a couple hundred different communities in my career because I was a consultant at one time, and we can get into that later. But and so I had this broad applicability of that experience across a bunch of different industries and types. So, we kind of talk primarily about how do you think about community as a business function, but to me, there's a lot of aspects of you don't do something different just because you're making a community for a business as opposed to making a community because that's what you love to do or it's a hobby or a passion of yours. There's a lot of overlap in the strategy and tactics of all of that.
So let's talk about a little bit about that past work experience in communities and everything. Give us some examples of some areas that you've risen to or that you had to dive into and help people out with this.
Well, like I said, I kind of got started pretty young, working on communities as doing moderation and community management and things like that. And then over the years, sort of graduated to, I don't know what you want to call it, I guess guru, or the guy that people asked, what should we do, just because I had amassed experience in this area that at the time was relatively new. So I was a consultant for about 6 years, actually at a community platform vendor, and was basically teaching companies how to do this, and really built my business acumen and my skills around that, and understanding what are your needs, and like I said, because the businesses I worked with were so varied across so many different industries, and they had so many different requirements for what they wanted to do. You learn a lot, you see a lot, and then you can kind of synthesize that into some best practices and ways that you think about how you deliver this in any type of environment. And then at some point around 2015, I departed that role and went to a company called Ultrix, which is a data analytics company, and built a whole community team there, and all of their community practice and everything that happens there, which was really a great opportunity, and a company that understood the value of that. And then sort of started to expand my horizons into customer experience, advocacy, learning, support, a number of sort of adjacent areas to community, but I would say kind of more higher level strategic work around, what does it mean when we say customer experience and what do we actually do about it? And then departed that role and was at another company for about a year. And then, that brought me up to the layoff. So, roles that I'm looking for these days are in that same vein, around, CX and community and advocacy and all those things. And to your point, given the times that we're in, I'm certainly starting to see a lot of businesses are taking this more seriously. I think they know they need it. They understand the value of it. And it turns out that if you, don't take care of your customers, you don't have customers anymore. And that's no good for anybody.
Yeah, and we're even seeing that with employees. I've noticed a lot of companies are marketing how they are treating their employees even now, and marketing the communities that they're building around their employees. Even those employees they've let go. I saw something the other day that Uber has built I wouldn't call it a community, it's more of a directory, but it kind of builds a community on some sense, in the sense that they've listed everybody that they've let go. I'm sure it's voluntary that people have signed up for this, but literally you go onto this website and you can find and see every Uber employee that has been let go. It links to their LinkedIn profiles, portfolios if they have them, and all that kind of information. So we're seeing community almost growing in completely different realms than we have before. You said you got started back with moderating community. Was this kind of what you wanted to do? Was this what you were led into, or did you just kind of stumble into it? And I ask this because I started out as a web developer. I stumbled into web development. I stumbled into being a paid developer. And from that, I continued to fumble and stumble my way up the chain. And now I'm a consultant helping web development teams be more efficient. So talk a little bit about your early days. Is this kind of where you wanted to go, or is this something that you kind of stumbled into?
I fell ass backwards into all of this, right? I was a kid, and I just loved playing video games. And this is when the internet was brand new. And so, when we got our first computer that filled a whole room. If you now we're on all these like super sleek laptops and tablets. If you remember back in the day, we had these computers that filled a whole room. And the first thing I did was went to it wasn't Google back then, but whatever Netscape or whatever the equivalent was, and I did a search and was trying to find gaming related stuff online, and stumbled across the PlayStation community, and so I became, what we would in the biz call a super user there, right? Just which is AKA I was there all the time. That was my life, is participating in that community, right? When I wasn't playing games or going to school. And eventually they were kind of like, they approached me, the team that was managing that community at the time, and they said, hey, you're here all the time. You obviously love it. You have a lot of knowledge around this. Do you want to, help us moderate the community? And, that was just another way for me to get connected and be more a part of this thing that I already loved. And, being a kid, it's like, hey, would you like to work for free for us? And I'm like, yeah, that'd be awesome. Right. so, so that's literally how I got involved in that. And, just over the years, did more and more things. I was an operations person there, and then I was a community manager, and then doing strategy, and then I got hired by the company who was actually the platform vendor at the time, and that's how I made my way kind of through the career. And it just sort of happened that because I got started doing this when it was so early on, that I had amassed a bunch of knowledge that just wasn't common at the time. And so that's where it's kind of like, hey, do you want to teach other people to do this? And that's how I sort of got into the consulting end of that.
That's awesome. So, talk a little bit. How have you seen communities change from those early days to today? I know it's a big topic, but kind of break it down for us. I mean, I'm sure that there's lots of businesses out there that are looking for people like you, and having that understanding and that history of community probably plays a lot into how we do community today.
Yeah. Well, what's interesting, Eric, is I always say that some of it's changed and some of it's stayed the same. So there's a lot of it's that's the same. I would say to focus on the things that have changed for sure is that it's become more of a accepted business practice, right? I think most companies that were doing community back in the day, it was almost accidental, or they had a community in spite of themselves, right? Like we've all seen a lot of companies that are kind of on that train, and so I think as the years went on and social kind of gave a boost to this and got it into exec boardrooms and people were thinking about it, companies have come to understand that this is actually a differentiator. It's a competitive advantage. It's something that we can use to deliver value to our customers and receive value back in a way that we just can't with other mechanisms, or that we couldn't before. And so, again, kind of going back to the customer experience part of this, which is like the higher order bit of community, is, if you're any company and you have competitors, which all companies do, it turns out that on a A/B feature comparison of your product with your competitor, there might not be a lot of difference or a lot of differentiation in your product lines, or whatever. And so the way that you differentiate yourself is you have a better experience, and you think about and you consider all of the down to the minutia level. How do we approach these people? How do we build something that's bigger than our product? And that's how we're going to attract, expand and retain our accounts. And so, community is just one of the biggest tools we have in the bag to do that. But then there's also a bunch of other things, under that big umbrella of customer experience. So I would say that's probably the biggest change that's happened over 2 decades, is that it's just become something that businesses are, aware of, or if they're not, when they do become aware of it, they start to, see the value of how this can really add something to their business that you can't really do, just by lowering your price $1 to be cheaper than the other guy, or whatever the case might be.
And what kind of challenges do you see with businesses as they broach into this idea of trying to create a community, either from scratch out of nothing, or trying to create a community out of a rabid use of followers, or around a product?
Well, I think a lot of it is because it's new, to some companies, that in and of itself is a challenge, right? But I also think, being open to working in a little bit different way than they're used to is probably one of the biggest challenges and things that companies that have been really successful in this area have done well. A lot of times there's this idea of, well, we have this big group of people, aka our customers or our audience, and we need to market to them like we do on all of our other channels, whether it's email or social or whatever. And it turns out that there's a different approach you need to take, and there's a different way you need to think about what's the purpose of this community, and why are people going to come here, and what value should we give them. And the people who do it really well, there's a more selfless sort of approach to it, to say, hey, our job with this thing is just to help people learn about this topic or connect with other people that are in this industry or make them feel like they're a part of something bigger than themselves. And you don't typically find those three things, in the standard playbooks for marketing and attracting customers and retention and whatnot. So there's just a different mindset that you got to have, or hire someone with the right mindset that can sort of lead you through that to make sure that you're approaching this in a very, sort of transparent and kind of organic way, as opposed to trying to force it so much. I think that's where you see companies get in trouble a little bit when they try to force, community and kind of try to do the old playbook.
When they try to see community more as a sales channel versus what it really is, which is trying to create a fan base. Correct?
Well, yeah, and what's interesting about it is, so if you sort of approach it the right way, and I'm using air quotes when I use right way here because it's different for every business, but when you approach it with this sort of servant mentality of, hey, we just want to use this to help people and bring them value, you actually do get all of those benefits sort of indirectly on the back end. So if we build a big community full of people and we treat them really well and we're helping them in their careers and they're learning new things and they're meeting new people, then they're going to remember that when it comes time to buy a product, right? And so we've seen very clear linkages in the data between people who participate, in a community and enjoy a customer experience that a company's putting out, and their lifetime value, their rate of retention, their rate of expand on their account. Do they buy more? Are they more engaged? Do they advocate for us more? All of those things are true for companies that really build great experiences and great communities. So it's all there. The value's there. It's just you have to approach it at a different way than you typically would, if that makes sense.
Sure. Yeah, I totally get that. And it feels like that we're seeing social media, as it would be, become its own form of community. Talk a little bit about how you would see, or how you would talk to a business about, they say, look, we don't have a big budget, but we have a really strong following on Twitter or Instagram or TikTok or whatever the end thing is currently. How would you kind of advise them or talk to them about growing that?
Well, I mean, most of those that you listed, are more broadcast channels, but it is true that you can have really interesting conversations and connect with people on a little bit different level on, let's say Twitter or LinkedIn, for example, than you can by not doing those things, or through email or whatever other traditional, methods you might use to communicate with your customers. And so, I think it's similar to what we talked about with community. There's a different mindset you have to have. There's a certain, lingo and moxie that goes along with each one of these channels, and why are people there, and what do they expect to get out of it, and how can we as a company participate in that in a way that's going to be additive instead of annoying, frankly, right? Like, some brands are really, really good at it and they're additive to the experience of those platforms, and other brands aren't. And so, I think you got to understand, like, who are you as a brand? Who is your audience? On what channels are we reaching them? How best can we serve their needs and entertain them, or, whatever, whatever the case is, depending on the type of company you are. And then, ultimately, how does that translate later on into value? Um, so I think, it's just the thing about this particular biz is the answers to most of the questions are, it depends, right? So it depends on what your strategy is and what you're trying to do and who your audience is, and they're all different. And that's where I think, people that have that experience broadly across this stuff over a couple of decades are probably in a better position to be able to come in and say, hey, here's what you should do. Okay, based on A, B, C, D, E, and F, here's the type of situation that's probably going to be best for you and will help you connect with your audience in the most fruitful possible way for both of you.
So do you see community as a multi-pronged approach? Is it something where a business or an organization needs to, say, focus on one area, like, hey, get really good at your community on this channel before you start expanding it to other ones? Or do you think it's something that they need to kind of spoon feed multiple areas and go from there?
Probably depends how advanced the business is in this particular area and how they think about it. I do think that it's useful in most cases for companies to think about it as a, like, hey, let's conquer one use case and get some success and show people in the company, hey, look at this, look how this is working. This is great. Now we can try something else. And there are certainly a ton of different, use cases for any kind of community or social channels and what you do there. Most people tend to focus on support first because that's the obvious, hey, let's reduce our support costs and make people happier, and they can, Google it at 24/7, 365 as opposed to calling us, kind of a thing. But then there's so much fruit beyond that in terms of, how do you connect with them in different ways? How do you educate them? How do you take in their ideas? For example, you see like Starbucks and Dell are kind of classic, really popular examples of, having strong ideation communities where you can go and submit your idea, and then 9 months later there's a new coffee at the shop or whatever. So there's a bunch of different use cases. I typically recommend, bite off what you can chew and get some success so you can show value, and then from there think about what else you can do. But there are certainly companies that are raring to go, and it's like, oh, let's go all in and let's do all the things. So probably just depends on your organization, what you need to do.
Yeah, that's great. And it's funny that, a lot of the vocabulary that you've used with servant leadership and it depends and let's look at what your goals are and something like that's very consultative. So your consulting background definitely shows, which is an awesome thing. I find that having been a consultant for a year now, so I'm by no means an expert in it, it is amazing how being a full-time employee, ideas always had to be backed up with so much data and financial cost and all these other things. But as a consultant, we're kind of given the preview to kind of walk in and be more precise and thoughtful is a better word, to be more thoughtful about what we're going to do and everything. So in your experience, what are some communities that you admire? You mentioned that you had a couple. You had the PlayStation back in the day when you were a young lad, which unfortunately they did close down the forums. So I
I
don't know
know.
if you
Tears.
felt the change of that. And then for me, one of the communities that I'm a big fan of is the Lego community because of what you said. People come out and they generate an idea and people vote on it, and those ideas actually become products later. And that's such a cool thing to me. So, what are some communities that you really admire out there?
Yeah, I love Lego for that reason. I like any kind of community that brings in people and takes their ideas. I think the ideation component is a really important one for especially consumer facing companies, but also B2B software companies as well. Just to rattle off a list here off the top of my head, National Geographic has a. I've always been interested in photography, and National Geographic has an awesome one called Your Shot, where they do contests, and amateurs and professionals alike come and post their photos, and they do contests, and that one's always been really interesting. I'm into electric cars, so I visit a lot of like hobbyist electric car type communities, more like passion based. I think the Spotify community is pretty cool, in terms of like how do you build a community around music lovers and talk about what music you're listening to lately and the nuances of it all, and you can get really like deep and philosophic in there about lyrics and things like that. So I think that's the cool thing, right? Is there's a community for everybody, regardless of what what you like to do or what you're interested in, or maybe you're trying to fix a plumbing problem in your house and you just need to figure out what you need to do, what wrench you need or something. There's so much out there, and it's all because we've spent decades building these communities and amassing these amazing amounts of knowledge and people that are passionate, that are willing to give their free time to volunteer. And so there's no reason why, from a business perspective, like we shouldn't harness that same energy, right, and build something really special around the products and services that we build. So there's a million different communities. I probably have logins at like 500 different forums and whatever across the web at this point. So I'm everywhere.
Yeah, and with Slack now, anybody can create a community. It feels like you just go in
Well,
there, set up your Slack channel, and away you go.
yeah, I mean, that's an interesting development too, is, back in the day we had IRC, which is, kind of a
Oh yeah.
pre version of what Slack has, certainly perfected and become. But you're right that there's also asynchronous chat. And so that's a big change, is that all of this used to be, or synchronous chat, I should say. So asynchronously, back in the day, you had all just forums, and it was like, well, you post a message and then you wait, for someone else to post a message, and this very linear, kind of format, or sometimes threaded. And now you have, other technologies in the mix. You have all, Snapchat, even messaging apps. I mean, there's so many different ways to think about how do you connect with other people, and do you do it in real time, or do you do it, you post something, I come a week later. I mean, it just, the possibilities are endless, and I think that's where you need someone that's kind of experienced all that and is also up on the latest too, and kind of be able to craft a strategy that's going to be right for what you're trying to accomplish.
Yeah, definitely. Well, let's flip that question around then. You talked about a bunch of communities that you admire. If you were given the opportunity to go fix one or more communities today, where would you focus at, or what companies would you approach?
Hmm. Well, Facebook for me is definitely the one, right? And I'm not afraid to say that. I think that Facebook in general is clearly one of the biggest, if not the largest community on the internet, right? And it's also the most far-reaching. It has the most power in terms of its ability to change things or influence people. Clearly, we've seen all the stories and the data on that, and the drama is ongoing. Look, I'm not here to talk trash about Facebook employees and what they're doing, because I'm sure there are a bunch of smart people over there. But I do think that there's a real opportunity in an environment like that to really get it right, and even accelerate even further what they've already built there, and maybe reconsider some of the decisions that have been made. So I think if I had my opportunity, that would probably be the one place where I think you could have the most impact in terms of how do we build something from a community perspective that clearly has global far reaching um, you know implications on people's lives and politics and everything across the board, safety, all of it.
Sure. And if you were given, say, a day to consult at Facebook, what would you get? What would be that one thing that you'd like? Okay, guys, if I can walk out of here today and convince you this one thing needs to change, what would that be for you?
Wow. It would probably be something policy driven, right? Because I think one of the ways that you can really truly affect change, in a community perspective or a community setting, I should say, is, what are the policies and how do we enforce them? And so I think every community needs that. Every community needs to, really carefully consider what their rules are and how they enforce them, and, when they make exceptions and when they don't. And it's all really complicated stuff, right? I think people look at that and they think it's so simple, just do this. But there's always so many consequences to these decisions. And so I think that's probably where I would spend my 8 hours, is how can we, think about the policy end of this, because that's going to drive, so much more than technology or other aspects.
Totally. And again, as a community grows, those policies get even more complex. I mean, you just see
Oh yeah.
how many times you get a new privacy policy update, or if there's a new law passed. I mean, how many of us heard about GDPR? I went through my own having to go through the GDPR stuff with companies I worked with during that phase. And then you have the CCPA with California putting theirs out, and everybody's getting flooded with all these new policy changes. I mean, my wife was like, "Oh my goodness, like I didn't even know I had accounts at this place," because she got all these privacy policy updates. So yeah, it is very complicated as you get bigger and you get more regulated as it would be. So that's definitely a good piece there. All right, so let's focus a little bit more on you. Let's talk about what have you been doing since the layoff. What have you been doing to better yourself, or what have you been doing to kind of improve yourself as it would be, or are you just finding a lot more times for gaming? Because I know personally for me that was one of my goals that I have not succeeded in. But hey, we've all got goals we got to work on.
Hashtag goals. Um, yeah, so I've been doing a lot of different stuff actually. I feel like I'm more busy now than maybe I was when I had a job. I don't know, but a couple of things I focused on are, definitely people. I mean, it's probably obvious coming from a guy with a community background, but one of the things I decided early on was that I wanted to take whatever time I get here, before I get the next thing, to really focus on helping my friends, my family, other people I don't even know. So I spent a lot of time, on the phone and in chats and other things over the last couple of months, just trying to give people, hope and knowledge and however I can help. I mean, even if it's just listening, so that's been a big focus. I talk to, several people every day at least. Um, we got the podcast, so that's been keeping me busy. It's been a good like creative outlet for me. I'm a very creative individual. I like getting my hands dirty in all things digital, whether it's audio, video, images, design. So that's been great. Been doing a little bit of consulting on the side for a friend, to help them out. So, just doing my best to be productive, be creating value for other people, and of course, having some conversations, looking for a job. But I think really for me, it's always about people, and that's where I try to focus most of my time.
Great. So, what advice would you give somebody that is in a situation similar to yours, and they're listening to this right now, what little bit of advice or hope or wisdom would you lay on them?
Yeah. Well, I've been talking to a lot of folks that have also been laid off or had reduced hours or furloughed or, all those different situations. And yeah, the general advice I've been giving them all is, as much as possible, don't let it weigh you down. Right. I think when you get laid off or fired or whatever, you know, there's a tendency to start thinking like you get in your own head a little bit and you start thinking, man, did I do something wrong? Did I, you know, make somebody mad? Did I not do my job? And the reality is that, no, like they made a business decision, you got laid off. It's, totally a financial decision on their part. And I think you have to really fight that, sort of fear and uncertainty. And it's certainly very rough, for people. And I want to be very sensitive to that and understand, how they feel is how they feel. And I never tell anybody not to feel a certain way, but I do think you have to be really careful and how far you let that go. And so I'm just trying to keep people focused on the task at hand here, whether that's enjoying your family or finding another gig or both or whatever. But I'm just trying to give people advice to say, hey, look, it's going to be okay. We're going to figure this thing out. We're all in this boat together, and trying to help them as much as I can. So that's been my basic advice more than anything else.
No, that's great advice, and it goes along line with a previous interview I had with one of the people I interviewed was a girl by the name of Olga Triplet, and I asked her the similar question, and she's like, you know what, just it's okay to freak out,
Yeah.
but just make sure that when you're done freaking out, that you get back out there and you know that this is going to end too. So that's fantastic advice and everything. So how is the job search going? Have you had any interviews? Have you got any warm leads? Kind of talk a little bit about your experience, especially in this COVID-19 era where we're all social distancing. We can't go into an office. How has that kind of also played into it?
Yeah. Well, I'm fortunate to have a pretty large network of folks that I've, connected with over the years. And that's always my advice, to anyone looking for a gig is LinkedIn is probably the best tool of all time in terms of being able to find a job and, connect with other people and make those connections, have them connect you to other people, get your foot in the door. So I've been doing that a lot. I've been leveraging the network and just talking to a lot of people. You certainly can go and click apply on websites, and there's nothing wrong with that. And maybe that'll work out for you. But I've always found that I get jobs by talking to people I know and people they know and trying to kind of sell myself and basically what we're doing here and say here's who I am, here's what I can bring to the table. So that's been the main thing that I've been doing, and I've certainly had a bunch of conversations with companies. It's a tough time just because they're even if they want to hire you, right, there's budget constraints and hiring constraints and other things due to just the current economic situation around COVID. So it is what it is. I think that the longer we go here, and I've definitely started to see a little bit of a trend of companies kind of loosening up a little bit. I think they feel like, okay, we did this and now we need to get back on the horse and start hiring and start moving our initiatives forward. So I think that's the good news. But we'll see how it goes. I'm still on the lookout for the right thing, and I more than anything else, I just want to make sure it's the right fit for them and the right fit for me, and that we can have a great partnership going forward. I don't want to force anything or take the first thing that's not right for me just because it's the first thing that came down the pike, right? So I think there's a little bit of strategy here in thinking about roles and trying to do what's best for you and your family.
Yeah, I mean that's important because I remember when I lost my job, in 2018. I took a few weeks there just to kind of let it simmer and come right with everything, and then started hard on the job search. And LinkedIn was definitely where I spent 90% of my time, as it would be. And it is all about connections. I think I've only had one job in my entire 44 years of being on this planet that I got because I didn't know somebody. And that was just a luck that I even got that job. But everybody else, every other job has been because of somebody else and everything. So as a community guy and as someone that sees the value in community and LinkedIn and relationships, what advice would you have someone to best utilize the connections they have? But more importantly, how can they grow new connections to kind of get them where they want to go?
Yeah. Well, I'm a big believer in networking, and I think it can be awkward at times. It can be weird. It can be strange. It can be, sort of disheartening when you meet someone and it doesn't, go as you planned in terms of maybe fostering a relationship with them. So I always am a big proponent. I recommend to, people that have been under my care or, tutelage on this is, always be networking, right? Always be reaching out to people, meet new people, make the time, to have conversations and be generous with your time. I almost never, well, probably not almost never, never. I never turn anybody down. If someone wants to talk to me or have a conversation, I try to make time for that. I try to, set aside time and be focused on it, not distracted and really make deep connections with them. Because you never know someone that you meet offhand today. Like, Eric, you might be getting me a job in 20 years, right? Like we just don't know. You don't know where your path is going to go and where their path is going to go. And, they become a CEO somewhere or, or something. So I think networking is one of the most important things I've ever done for my career. And it's paid more dividends than anything else I've ever done in my career. And then, how do you utilize it? Well, you reach out and you say, hey, we talked a long time ago, or maybe someone you talk to all the time, and you say, I'm looking for a job, and here's kind of what I'm looking for. I think it's important to be clear about what you're looking for. I see a lot of this on LinkedIn where, and don't get me wrong, if you're listening to this, folks, you're trying to be helpful, so don't take this, as a slight. But there's a lot of like, hey, reach out if I can help you, and then on the other end, it's like hey, I need help, but there's not a lot of specificity in either of those. And so I would say whether you're on the helper or the helpee side of that equation, do your best to be specific about here's what I'm looking for, here's what I think my value is, here's maybe a list of companies that I'm interested in or companies like them. And that'll help people help you, right? They'll be able to kind of target the search a little bit more and maybe, spend most of their time connecting you to the right folks as opposed to the convenient folks, if that makes sense.
No, that's awesome. It's funny that you mentioned that. Hey, let me know if I can help, and leaving it broad like that, because I did see last week when there was the rash of announcements made about furloughed employees and downsizing. It seemed like last week was like when the hammer dropped for a lot of people across a lot of different industries. I saw a lot of people posting on there, hey, connect with me, and if I can connect you in my network, let me know. And that's all great and well, and I'm so guilty of it. I reached out to a lot of people for twofold. One, to connect with them and let them know that, hey, I've got a big network, 2,000 some odd people, which is small in the grand scheme of things for a lot of people. But hey, if I can connect you with somebody, I'm more than happy to make that introduction, even though I have no idea who you are. But also to, kind of promote my podcast, as it would be, because it's kind of one way to get their voice and everything out there. But how would you recommend, when someone's doing that cold connection, what's a good, I don't know, I don't want to say template, but what's kind of like, you mentioned specificity there. Are you looking at them to walk in and say, hey, I see that you're in product, I'm in product, to help me find a job? Or is there some other way that you found to be successful for you when you're growing your relationships and community?
Yeah. Well, one of the commitments I made when I was laid off is I made a post on LinkedIn and Twitter, and I just said, "Hey, look, if you're also in this boat, I'm happy to, review your resume and give you tips. I'm happy to listen if you just need someone to listen to. I'm happy to make a connection. I'm happy to do mentoring, and I just made it sort of clear, hey, here's the things I'm willing to do, and here's the value that I can provide you. So I think, those are some examples on the helper side. On the helpee side, I think it's like, what do you actually need, right? So if you just sort of message someone and say, hey, I'm looking for a job, can you help me? Again, I think you just want to be specific about what kind of job, what's your time frame, what are you doing? And then, to your point on the connection part, I think that's particularly tricky. So I'm I'm always willing to recommend anybody that I know and that I have experience with and I can vouch for. I'm happy to send, a glowing recommendation or connection request to someone to say, hey, you really need to talk to so and so because they're awesome. Um, Sometimes you get ones where, to your point, it's like, well, I don't really know this person and they're asking me to connect. And I think that's where you just have to be honest with both parties, right? So you say to the person that's requesting that, you say, hey, look, I'm happy to connect you. Yeah, I know, Jane or Tom or whoever over at that company. I'll shoot them an email and, tell them that you're looking and pass along your resume, which, hopefully you provide that to me as well. And I can give them some more context for this. But you got to understand too, like, I don't know what they're doing. I don't know if they're hiring. I don't know, if they've already found someone for that role. So I think setting expectations there is good. And then when you do email or send a LinkedIn message or whatever you're going to do, call someone to say, hey, I got this person. They might be an interesting candidate. I think it's always important to just be honest and say, look, I don't really know them that much, and but they may be interesting. You should, maybe take a look at their resume, and then if you want to call them, you can call them, but no pressure, right? I never try to force anybody into like, well, you need to talk to them because they're my friend, and if we're friends, then you'll talk to my friend. I don't think that's the way to go about it. I think it's just being transparent and kind of saying, hey, here's someone, and if you want more information, I can get it. If not, no worries. You do you, and sort of alleviating that pressure that's sometimes present on that whole transaction that can take place.
Yeah, and I find that I actually get the best results when I apply zero pressure. I've got a really good friend who recently got furloughed, and this person reached out to me and said, "Hey, I got furloughed. What can you do?" And I knew of like 3 or 4 people that I could contact right away. And these are pretty senior people. And even if they weren't senior people, I would approach it the same way. And it's just a very simple email. It says, "Hey, got this person of mine that is just recently furloughed. They're looking to see what else they can get into, maybe make an industry jump. I know that you deal with people like this. Here's their LinkedIn profile. I attached their resume. If you're really interested in them, reach out to them. If I can answer questions about them, I'm happy to do that as well." And then there's literally no pressure at all. And if it's someone that I don't know, that's literally how the email goes across, is like, "Hey, so and so, I've got this connection in LinkedIn, and looking over their resume, they seem like they've got some good qualities. Just thought you'd pass it along, or pass along to your HR group. And if a connection happens, great. You don't need to get back to me on this one. Just reach out to them directly." And those seem to work really well. And they seem to be, like you said, it takes the pressure off people, and people are more willing to act on it, especially in their own time, because they're getting inundated. One of the guys that I reached out to is a CIO for a company here in Atlanta. And I said, "Hey, this guy's great. He'd be really good for this. He'd be great for this for you in the future. I know you're probably getting inundated with this. So thanks for just reading the email." And he got back and he said, "Hey, looked at the resume, love them. We're at a hiring freeze right now, but I'm putting this over my contact later file." So again, you never know who you're contacting, what's going on. So that's great advice and great thoughts there on that.
Yeah. One other, can I issue a challenge to your audience? Would you be okay with
Yeah,
me doing that? So
challenge away, man.
if you're listening to this, here's my challenge to you. Yeah, go on LinkedIn, find one of your connections. Just start with one. I guarantee you'll do more after you do one of these. Go find someone you really have known a long time, and you know their work and you know their value, and go to their page and scroll down to the recommendations area and write them a recommendation. I think it's a super underutilized feature of LinkedIn. And it doesn't matter if they have a job right now or if they're looking. Someday that's going to come in handy for them. And it's a great way, for you to kind of give the nod of approval, but also so that other people can start to see what the value and quality of this person is, right? But just by kind of cruising their profile. And I think it's a great way to, typically I've never asked for them in return. I just do them, and then some people give them back. But it creates this great culture of making it clear, who's good, what they do well, and just kind of putting it all out there. We don't tend to do that very often, and I think in this world, the least you could do is say something nice about someone that and try to give them a little bit of help. And someday maybe someone's scrolling along and they see that and they go, "Oh, I didn't know that they had that skill. That's really cool." So that'd be my challenge to anyone listening is pay it forward, and maybe it'll come back to you.
Yeah, I love that challenge because I'm a huge fan of the recommendation area. Even as a people leader back in the day, I would go in and write recommendations to my people that were still employed with me, because I knew that someday that would have value. And seeing that, I know that when I go and look at a new profile, as a hiring manager, I would look at their recommendations. When was the last time they had a recommendation? What was that recommendation about? Was it in their last role, or was it 3 or 4 roles ago? And that's always important because we always get asked, in an interview. So if I was to talk to your coworkers today, what would they say about you? We don't really know. I mean, we have our perception, but having that written down is such a big thing. So I love that challenge. And I think anybody that just does one is just barely doing the scratching the surface. I think you need to get out there and do as many as you possibly can, because it will pay in dividends. People will see that, and you do get prompted, hey, so-and-so just left you a recommendation. Why don't you give them one? And it can go both ways, and it really is very powerful. So that's a great thing. I think that may be the sound bite that we use for this podcast is that challenge and everything. So that's awesome. So what are some fun things that you do? How do you keep yourself and keep your sanity during this time? What are some hobbies that you enjoy? What are some things that you do just to keep the days exciting for you?
Yeah. Well, during the weekdays, a lot of dog walks. Try to get out of the house, get some sun. It's been beautiful, a beautiful, beautiful spring so far here in Denver. So that's been wonderful. We hike a lot. We love going to the mountains. We go to the mountains every weekend, and we try a different hike. We go somewhere different, see something different, and just getting out, kind of into the physical world as much as we can to do those types of activities that are safe right now, or has been really healing for my soul to go out there and get the fresh air and see the sun and the beauty of the snow on the mountains and all that. So that's definitely been the main thing. And then, again, just picking up the phone and calling friends and family as much as I can, and just having meaningful, conversations with people. I called my grandpa yesterday, and it just healed my heart, to talk to him for an hour. So just trying to stay connected to people and nature as much as I can.
That's awesome. Yeah, I think if my wife could move us anywhere, Colorado would definitely be one of those areas. She's a very big avid hiker, and when the lockdown happened here in Atlanta, she was just crushed because she couldn't go out on the trails. She's literally hiking at least 2-3 times a week since I've been work from home, and it's just been awesome for her. So I can totally, as you're saying it, I'm just like picturing it all in my head, and I'm getting jealous by the moment as it would be. But we have great hikes out here in Atlanta too.
You guys come on out sometime when that's a thing, when we can get on airplanes. You come on out, and we'll do it, man. We'll go to the mountain. We'll go for a hike.
That'll be awesome. She would love that. That would be great. All right. So the big final question. This is something we ask everybody. So what was the last thing that you bought off of Amazon?
Oh man. Uh Socks. For whatever reason, all of my socks started to get holes in them. I had a very angry wife about it. She was very upset with the holes and the little dust bunnies, and so she got me back on the straight and narrow, and now I have nice, comfy, non-holy socks. So that's my very exciting Amazon purchases.
That's awesome. I love it. Socks. Good job. Well, Brian, I really appreciate you taking the time to chat with me today. This was a lot of fun. I really enjoyed learning about you, learning about community, and just being able to go back and forth on this. And I wish you all the best of luck in your search as well as your future endeavors. And it will definitely be a person and a career that I will be watching going forward, no doubt.
Yeah. Well, thanks so much again for having me, and thanks for doing this just as an idea. I mean, I think you trying to help people in this way is really inspiring and really awesome. So keep up the good work. I'll be listening for future episodes.
Excellent. Thank you again. You've been listening to Fired Before Christmas. I really hope you enjoyed today's episode and getting to know my guests better. If you'd like to learn more about our show, please find us on the web at firedbeforechristmas.com. And any questions or interest in the show, please feel free to email me at host@firedbeforechristmas.com, or again, check out our website. Until next time, I'm your host, Eric Ryan Jones, and you've been listening to Fired Before Christmas.